If we can just begin with Matt Gaetz. Clearly, we all saw the writing on the wall here. It was going to be very difficult for him to get to the requisite votes to receive Senate confirmation. But to drop out this early and in this fashion, what does it signal about the kind of choice Donald Trump is going to be able to put forward to serve this role in his stead?
It suggests that he's going to have to go with a lot safer of a pick. Remember, Gaetz was just nominated like a week ago. So this is a really stunning reversal. And he's not someone who, shies away from a sign of conflict. He, likes to kind of charge forward, head forward into that. So there's already been some names floated. Someone like Jay Clayton might be someone who's already been, Trump has already picked for Southern District of New York, but could elevate up to Attorney General Todd Blanche, his lawyer from his hush money trial, potentially. So there's already a lot of more conventional picks that are sort of in the milieu. So we'll see kind of how that goes. Right now, Mar-a-Lago is totally distracted with Treasury Secretary. There's lots of names flying, lots of meetings happening, and they're still trying to land that one, which has really dogged them for days.
So presumably Matt Gaetz's meetings with senators didn't go quite as well as planned yesterday for him to come out with this today. But it raises some more questions, Gregory, Korte. Number one, will the ethics inquiry into Matt Gaetz be released? I know there's a Democratic effort to force a floor vote to make that happen post-Thanksgiving. There are also questions, though, about whether Matt Gaetz shows up for the job in January. He was elected to the 119th Congress and could do a George Costanza in the new year here, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly how I put it when I talked to some experts on this. I fell down a little bit of a rabbit hole this afternoon trying to figure out what happens to Matt Gaetz, because he technically resigned from the 118th Congress. He was just elected to the 119th Congress. He said in his resignation that he doesn't intend to take the oath. Is that binding? Right. Or could he just show up and be sworn in anyway? One important thing to remember is that Matt Gaetz is not particularly popular on either side of the aisle of the House. He was the guy who engineered the coup against former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. There were a lot of hurt feelings over that. And so to the extent that the House determines what its membership is, likely they may not choose not to seek him. But also remember, this is a very evenly divided House, maybe 2 or 3 votes, and Trump has appointed 2 of them to prime positions in his administration. And so there's not a whole lot of room. They might need Matt Gaetz's vote, and they might not be, willing to wait until a special election can bring in another likely Republican to that seat.
Well, it's an excellent point. For now, though, certainly when it comes to the nomination confirmation questions, we know the answer for Matt Gaetz. For some of the other more controversial picks the president-elect has made, though, this could perhaps put even greater scrutiny on them, like the nominee for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who was on Capitol Hill today to meet with senators and make his own case for confirmation a day after a police report involving sexual assault allegations against him was released. Here's Hegseth this morning.
I just want to thank the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, who spent the morning with me meeting with senators of the United States. We take very seriously the advice and consent role that the U.S. Senate has. We look forward to engaging in that process. We take absolutely nothing for granted, and we welcome the opportunity to talk to any senator that wants to talk to us.
Did you sexually assault a woman in Monterey, California?
I have, as far as the media is concerned, I'll keep this very simple. The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much.
So as we consider the defense secretary designate's future here, Laura, has there been any indication from the Trump transition team that they are rethinking this or might encourage him to withdraw himself, as Matt Gaetz did, rather than wait or risk a confirmation vote going down on the Senate floor?
Not yet. However, I'll note that there's a long time before Hegseth will actually face a confirmation hearing and confirmation vote. That's 2 months from now, essentially, perhaps a little bit more. And just in the past 10 days or so since his name has come up in association with the Pentagon chief job, there's already been sort of a drip, drip, drip of things coming out. We could see a lot more that could force Republican senators to say, hey, look, we don't want this guy. We've seen, some folks come out and say affirmatively, yes, I think he should be able to do the job. But others have really withheld judgment and say we want to let this process play out. There's a lot of runway there. Hegseth is partially harmed in his positioning here because, one, he is not only has these sexual assault allegations against him, but also is not widely considered to be a highly qualified pick for this job. He doesn't have the military experience that someone typically would, so that could be 2 strikes, and a third could be potentially fatal for him.
Well, there's still one big blank we're waiting to fill in here. You mentioned it right off the top, Kailey. That's Treasury Secretary. We're getting spoiled with all these early announcements, I feel like. Gary Cohn reminded us this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance that it was the week after Thanksgiving that Donald Trump hired his economic team in the first administration. But Bloomberg's Sonali Basak spoke today with Citadel CEO Ken Griffin about the open Treasury Secretary role. And some of the names here in contention, Mark Rowan of Apollo Global Management specifically, here's what he had to say.
Mark is clearly one of the great thought leaders in alternative asset management. And if Mark is offered the opportunity to be Secretary of Treasury, please take the job.
He's got a couple boxes to check here, we're told, Gregory. He's got to make Wall Street happy, make MAGA happy, and be really good on TV. Are we getting any closer?
Yeah, Mark Rowan is an interesting guy, and he's one that I've been following personally over the past year or so because he's one of those billionaires that we were watching to see which side of the fence will he fall off of. He was never sold on Trump. He was never sold on Biden. He's gotten a little Trumpier in the past few weeks, and especially after the election. Some of his public comments have been very bullish on Trump. He certainly, as we heard from Ken Griffin, he would make Wall Street happy, would not make MAGA happy. He's a private equity guy, and there are huge swaths of this country that blame private equity and Apollo's, specifically Mark Rowan's firm, for this economic disruption that we have seen that's led to the elimination of so many manufacturing jobs.
That's an excellent point. So as we consider Rowan or Kevin Warsh, Bill Hagerty, Scott Bessent, these are names who have been floating out there for some time. Laura, if it was going to be one of them, wouldn't it have happened already? Or is it likely when we get this choice, it's going to be someone who we did not previously understand to be on the short list?
It's clear that Trump is not happy and not sold on any of his choices yet. If he were, he would have picked someone. But he may also be, we know that they are looking at kind of the comprehensive team. Okay, who do you slot into the Treasury Secretary job, National Economic Council? Who do you put as the trade rep? So some of that machinations is what's happening right now. So it could be one of these names, but do not rule out that it's a total dark horse pick and we could be completely surprised at a name that nobody's prepared for.